The year was 1849, and deep in the Mississippi Delta, the clang of iron echoed across the plantation grounds. It was a sound that carried both order and cruelty, a reminder that the plantation's wealth was built not only on cotton fields but also on the hands of those forced to labor in fire and ash. Among them was Isaac, the enslaved blacksmith, a man whose hands bore both scars and strength, whose arms had been shaped by years at the forge. Isaac was not born free. From the moment he took his first breath, chains defined his world. The overseers told him that iron was his life, that he would always work it, bend it, and shape it for the profit of others. They called him strong, useful, reliable, their way of saying he was too valuable to waste in the fields. And so he lived in the heat of the smithy, hammering iron into plows, horseshoes, shackles, and tools of labor. But every strike of his hammer echoed differently in his own heart. What the overseers saw as strength, Isaac felt as defiance simmering quietly beneath the surface. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with muscles hardened not by choice but by necessity. The fire from the forge burned into his skin daily, leaving him marked by heat and ash. His clothes were always singed, his hands calloused and cracked. Yet there was something in his eyes, something sharp and unyielding. Though they could shackle his wrists, they could not shackle that gaze. The smithy was both his prison and his sanctuary. Within its walls, Isaac learned not just the craft of iron but the language of it. He understood how it bent under heat, how it resisted and then gave way, how its form could be reshaped into anything: a lock, a blade, a chain. He knew the secrets of metal in a way few others did, and though the overseers praised him for his skill, they never imagined what that knowledge could one day become. Every day, Isaac was ordered to forge the very symbols of his people's bondage. He made the chains that bound wrists, the collars that cut into necks, the cuffs that clinked with each weary step. The overseers would throw broken shackles onto his table and demand he mend them quickly, so no runaway could ever slip free again. Each time he hammered iron back into form, his jaw tightened, his anger simmered. He was forced to be both the maker of bondage and the wearer of it. That contradiction gnawed at him like a wound that would never heal. He remembered his mother's voice, faint and weary, whispering to him when he was a boy, "Iron can hold you, Isaac, but fire can change iron. Fire can change anything." She had died when he was still young, her body worn thin from years in the fields, but her words lived on in him. The overseers believed fire and iron made Isaac theirs. What they did not know was that fire and iron were also teaching him about power. In the evenings, when the work was done, Isaac sat by the dying embers of the forge, staring into the glow. Around him, the sounds of the plantation continued, the moans of the weary, the crack of the whip, the cries of children born into chains. He listened, but in the firelight, he imagined something different. He saw chains melting, links dissolving into molten pools, reshaped not into shackles, but into something sharper, stronger. His mind began to turn with the same rhythm as his hammer. The overseers thought Isaac's silence was submission. They mistook his bowed head for obedience. But inside, he was learning, waiting, planning. Each piece of iron he shaped for them was also a lesson for himself. Each day in the smithy taught him not only how to make tools, but how to craft weapons. The turning point came one sweltering afternoon. Isaac had been repairing shackles brought from the fields, their hinges bent and rusted. The overseer barked orders over his shoulder, reminding him to hurry. There were new runaways to bind. Isaac stared at the broken metal in his hands, its edges jagged like teeth. He imagined it not around a man's wrists but pressed into the overseer's flesh. He had to bite down on his lip to keep the thought from escaping into his face. For the first time, he realized the forge was not just their power. It could become his. From that day forward, Isaac's hammer carried a different rhythm. He worked with the same strength, but his mind was no longer only on the tasks given to him. He began to see scraps of metal differently. Broken links, bent nails, discarded hinges. These were not waste, as the overseers thought. They were pieces of a puzzle he had yet to finish. They were the beginnings of something dangerous. Something they would never expect from the man they thought they owned. Isaac's life was a cycle of fire, hammer, and ash. But in that cycle, rebellion was being forged, slowly and silently. For years he had been the blacksmith of bondage, but deep inside him, something harder than iron was taking shape. Chains may have been his work, but chains would not be his legacy. The plantation slept at night, but the forge never truly died. Its embers glowed long after the overseers had left, whispering to Isaac like a secret flame. Most believed the smithy was lifeless after dusk, a place of silence until morning. But Isaac knew better. He had learned how to feed the fire just enough so it stayed alive, waiting, breathing quietly in the dark. It was there, in those stolen hours, that his rebellion began to take form. By day he forged their tools, plow blades for the fields, hinges for their doors, locks for their barns. By night, he turned to scraps, bits of iron that overseers dismissed as useless. A bent hinge here, a broken link there, fragments of rusted chains no longer fit to bind. He pocketed them quietly, carrying them in folds of cloth, slipping them into corners of the smithy where no one bothered to look. Each piece was a secret kept, a shard of possibility. The first time Isaac melted a chain, it was not an accident. He placed the broken links into the fire and watched as the iron softened, glowing red, bending to his will. He hammered it flat, shaping it not into another shackle but into the faint outline of a blade. It was crude, jagged, not yet sharp enough to cut. But it was proof. Proof that the very tools of his bondage could become his weapons. The fire did not care whether it shaped chains or knives. It obeyed only the hand that guided it. Weeks passed, then months. The overseers never suspected. To them, Isaac was dependable, obedient, the blacksmith who never spoke unless spoken to. They watched him work, but never looked too closely at what he kept hidden beneath ash and soot. His strength made him valuable. His silence made him invisible. That invisibility became his shield. But Isaac was not entirely alone. The other enslaved men and women noticed small things. The way he lingered in the smithy after dusk, the way his eyes gleamed when he handled scraps of iron, the way his hammer struck with a rhythm that carried more than labor. It carried intention. They did not ask questions aloud. Questions could mean punishment, even death. But whispers began to spread in the cabins at night. "Isaac's working on something," one murmured. "He's making more than plow blades," another said. "What is he planning?" a third whispered, eyes wide with both hope and fear. The whispers grew, but so did trust. Isaac never spoke of his plans directly, but his silence told them enough. They began to shield him in small ways, distracting overseers when he worked late, smuggling scraps of food so he would not have to leave the forge, carrying water to douse the fire when dawn approached too quickly. Each act was quiet, but together they formed a net of protection. The plantation's overseers never saw it. They believed they had broken every will, crushed every spirit. But the enslaved had built a network of silence stronger than any chain. The breaking point came one brutal evening when the overseer, a man named Harris, dragged a boy no older than 12 into the yard. The child had dropped a bundle of cotton, his arms too small to carry the weight demanded of him. For this, Harris whipped him mercilessly, each crack of the lash tearing through the night air. Isaac heard the screams from the smithy. He could not see, but he knew. His hammer fell harder that night, each strike echoing with fury. When the boy was finally dragged away, bleeding and unconscious, Isaac made his vow. He would not let this continue. He would not die with iron shackles still clinking around his wrists, leaving behind only scars and silence. If the overseers demanded his hands shape chains, then those same hands would shape their downfall. That night, Isaac returned to the forge with a fire inside him hotter than the flames he stoked. He laid out the scraps he had gathered over months. Broken links, rusted cuffs, fragments of locks. Each piece told a story of bondage. But under his hammer, they became something new. He melted them, reforged them, sharpened them. His chains became knives. His shackles became short, curved blades. His fragments became points as sharp as teeth. The smithy filled with the smell of burning iron, with sparks leaping like stars. Sweat poured down Isaac's back as he worked through the night, his muscles straining, his arms aching. But he did not stop. The sound of the hammer was no longer just labor, it was prophecy. Each strike said what words could not. The time was coming. By dawn, hidden in the shadows of the forge, lay the beginnings of his arsenal. Crude but deadly. Iron that had once bound him was now ready to cut. Isaac wrapped the blades in cloth and buried them beneath the ash. No overseer would think to search there. To them, ash was nothing more than waste, the dead remains of fire. But Isaac knew better. From ash came steel, and from steel would come rebellion. And so the plan began to breathe. Slowly, silently, like the embers he kept alive in the night. Isaac knew the risk. Discovery meant death not only for him, but for anyone who had shielded him. Yet the vow he made over the screams of that beaten child burned brighter than fear. The forge had always belonged to the overseers. Now, for the first time, it belonged to him. The night of the strike had finally arrived. The plantation fields were unusually silent, as though the land itself held its breath. Cicadas hummed faintly, and the moon hung low, its silver glow breaking through the heavy southern air. Isaac stood outside the smithy, his broad shoulders glistening with sweat, not from labor this time, but from the pounding of his own pulse. In his hands, he held what no man had ever dared to craft in the belly of slavery, a blade hammered from his very shackles. It was heavy, not just in iron, but in meaning. Each swing would carry the weight of years spent in bondage, of brothers and sisters whipped, chained, and buried under the cruelty of overseers. Isaac whispered a quiet prayer, though not the kind his master's preacher had taught him. This prayer was to his ancestors, the spirits of those who had endured chains before him, whose blood had soaked into the cotton fields, whose cries had gone unanswered in the dark of night. Tonight, he vowed, their voices would be heard in the clash of iron. He was not alone. Beside him stood Ruth, her eyes burning with the same fire, clutching a crude torch. Behind them gathered a small band, slaves from the quarters, men and women alike, some armed with sharpened tools, others carrying stones, sticks, or whatever could serve as a weapon. They had chosen Isaac to lead, not only because he was strong, but because his craft had given them something greater than hope. He had forged their desperation into steel. The overseers had grown arrogant, drinking late into the night, confident that the slaves under their charge were too broken to ever rise. They feasted in the big house, their laughter spilling out into the humid night. Isaac knew this was the moment. He raised his blade, not to the sky but toward the quarters, toward the very people he swore to protect, and gave a single nod. The fire was lit, the torch pressed against the dry wooden walls of a storage shed. Flames crackled to life, painting the darkness in orange. Panic began to stir in the distance, the overseers shouting orders, their boots pounding against the earth as they rushed to contain the fire. But they never expected what awaited them. Isaac stepped from the shadows, his blade glinting under the firelight. The first overseer barely had time to draw his pistol before Isaac's chain-forged weapon cut through the air with a metallic scream. The sound of iron striking flesh was sharp, final. The man fell with a cry that split the night, his weapon clattering uselessly to the ground. For the first time in years, the sound of an overseer's voice carried fear, not authority. The others came running, their whips and rifles ready, but they were met with fury unlike any they had imagined. The slaves, long beaten into silence, now roared like a storm breaking free. Ruth hurled her torch into the fields, igniting the dry stalks. The air filled with smoke and chaos. Isaac swung his blade with the force of generations, his arms steady, his strikes precise. Each overseer that fell was more than a man defeated. It was centuries of cruelty collapsing under the weight of rebellion. The fight was brutal, raw, unrelenting. Blood mixed with firelight, screams tangled with the crackle of burning wood. Isaac took a wound to his shoulder, a rifle shot grazing him, but he did not falter. Pain only drove him forward, reminding him of the lashes he had endured, the chains that had scarred his skin. Now, those same chains gave him power. When the last overseer stumbled backward, bleeding and broken, Isaac stood over him, breathing hard, his chest heaving like a drum of war. The man begged, his voice trembling, offering promises of freedom, of leniency, of anything that might spare his life. Isaac said nothing. He simply raised his blade, forged from the iron meant to bind him, and delivered the final strike. Silence fell over the field. The overseers, the masters of fear, were no more. But the night was not yet over. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the barns and licking at the edges of the big house. The slaves, wild with both terror and triumph, gathered around Isaac. Some wept, some sang, their voices rising in old spirituals turned into battle cries. For the first time, they were not singing for endurance. They were singing for victory. Isaac, his body slick with sweat and blood, lifted his blade high into the smoky night. His voice thundered, carrying across the burning fields. "We are not property. We are not chains. We are free." The cry echoed, and in that moment, every man, woman, and child in the quarters felt the weight of the impossible shift. The plantation that had once symbolized their suffering now burned behind them, collapsing under the very rage it had birthed. Isaac knew there was no turning back. Freedom was not guaranteed, and death might follow with the dawn. But tonight, they had claimed something far greater than survival. They had claimed their dignity. The blade, still dripping, gleamed like a beacon in his hand. It was more than a weapon. It was a symbol that the enslaved could not only endure, but strike back, and in doing so, change the course of their destiny. The rebellion had begun. The fields still smoldered with fire when the first light of dawn broke across the horizon. The air reeked of smoke, blood, and iron, and the plantation, once a symbol of dominion, now looked like a battlefield scarred by defiance. Isaac stood in the center of it all, his blade still clutched in his hand, its edge stained but unbroken. Around him, men and women huddled close, their eyes darting nervously to the tree line beyond the burning house. They knew what came next. For every overseer struck down, for every torch thrown into the barns, a wave of vengeance would follow. The plantation owners across the county would not let this uprising stand. Slave patrols would soon sweep the roads, hounds would be unleashed, militias would be called from towns and villages. Freedom had been won for one night, but to keep it, Isaac and his people would have to outrun an empire built to crush them. Isaac's voice cut through the morning fog. "Take only what you need. Water. Bread. Nothing more. We move now." He spoke with a command that silenced even the cries of children. Though he had never worn the title of leader, he was now the one they followed. They fled into the woods, slipping through thickets, their bare feet torn by roots and stones. Isaac carried the youngest on his shoulders, his own wound reopening with every stride, but he never faltered. Behind them, the roar of dogs began to rise, distant but growing closer. The hunt had begun. For days they moved under the cover of night, hiding by day in swamps and hollows. The group dwindled, some too weak to continue, others captured in sudden raids, dragged screaming back toward chains. Still, Isaac pressed forward, his chain-forged blade slung across his back, a reminder of the vow he had made, to never again be broken. One night, as rain poured down in sheets, they reached the edge of a river. On the far side lay freedom, or so the whispers claimed. Beyond the water was a path north, through marshes that patrols feared to tread. Isaac waded into the current first, the water rising to his chest, his blade held high to keep it from rusting. Behind him, the others followed, clutching one another, their breath sharp with both fear and hope. But freedom is never won without sacrifice. A horn sounded in the distance, and the glow of lanterns flickered through the trees. Shots cracked the night. One by one, bullets tore into the water, splashes erupting like sudden storms. Screams echoed, cut short by the river's choke. Isaac turned, fury blazing in his eyes, and shouted for the others to keep moving. He waded back, planting himself between his people and the oncoming patrol, the chain blade flashing in the lightning's glare. The first man rushed him, rifle raised. Isaac swung, the iron singing as it cut through wood and bone alike. Another came, and still Isaac fought, the river turning red around him. But the odds were impossible. His body bore wounds too deep, too many, and yet he stood, striking until his arms could no longer lift the blade. When at last he fell, it was not in silence. His final cry tore through the rain, a sound that was neither defeat nor despair, but defiance, a roar that seemed to call on every enslaved soul across the South to remember that chains could be broken, that iron could be reshaped. His blade slipped beneath the current, sinking into the riverbed, where it would rest as both weapon and symbol. Those who survived the crossing never forgot him. They carried his story northward, whispering it in safe houses and secret camps, speaking his name as though it were fire passed hand to hand. Isaac, the blacksmith who melted his own chains, who forged freedom from bondage, who stood unyielding in the flood of oppression. His death became more than tragedy, it became legend. And long after the smoke had cleared from that plantation in 1849, long after the overseers' names were forgotten, the tale of Isaac endured. It was told in the hush of cabins, in the rhythm of work songs, in the pulpit cries of preachers who dared to imagine liberty. His chains, once meant to bind him, had instead become the very tools of rebellion. Isaac may not have lived to see freedom, but in the memory of his people, he had already carved it. And somewhere in the silence of the riverbed, beneath mud and stone, his blade still waits, an iron ghost forged in fire, carrying the weight of one man's refusal to bow.